Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we're going to spend some time reflecting on Pluto's final days in the sign of Capricorn. And to do that today, we are going to draw some parallels between the symbolism of Capricorn and the ancient mythology surrounding the god Pan, who was a half goat, half man god that ancient philosophers and mystics sometimes associated with the sign of Capricorn for various reasons. So we're going to look at some of those reasons today I'm going to read you a few excerpts from one of my favorite books of all time, written by James Hillman, called Pan and the Nightmare. And so there are going to be some really interesting ways that we connect the sign of Capricorn and the sea goat to the symbolism of Pan and to things like animism. And there's an interesting way in which the experience of nightmares comes in to play in Hillman's book as he draws out some of the deeper archetypal and psychological significance of the god Pan. So I think you'll find this really entertaining and interesting. And certainly it will give us a really nice way to think about Pluto, this lord of the underworld, and a god that is often associated with the processing of unconscious material that often comes up in nightmares and dreams in general. There's another book that Hillman wrote that's very Plutonian, and I thought about drawing on some things from that book as well, called Dream in the Underworld. But I thought today we're just going to focus on Pan and a few of the excerpts from this text. And I think you'll find it really interesting, especially as it relates to the sign of Capricorn and reflecting on what Pluto in Capricorn has been about, what it's done within us, and maybe how we've noticed it at work in the world. I think that there are some really nice sort of some ways of sort of summarizing some of the philosophical and psychological value of this transit that we've been experiencing for, going on 16 years. So that's what we'll do today. I think you'll really enjoy this. And again, I would also recommend, if you like the excerpts from this book, and I think you will, there's just a few brief ones that I'm going to read, and I would recommend reading the whole book because it will blow your mind. But anyway, that's our goal for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps our channel to grow when you subscribe. If you listen regularly, it's free to do so. It helps us grow our business and our community. And we're trying to get to 80,000 subscribers by the spring equinox. I'm trying to set like progressive goals to grow the channel. So that feels like a next good step. Let's see if we can develop 10,000 more subscribers by the spring equinox. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Don't forget, we have 2 events coming up, a live webinar next week on the 17th, which is on astrological compatibility and what I think works and does not work when it comes to astrological compatibility. Go to the events page, click on live talks. You'll see on October 17th, you can register for the webinar. You can't attend live, you get the recording. Under the courses page, you will find the first year program, which begins November 16th. This is one of the greatest elections that I have seen in my history of doing this course for 14 years now. And that is because Pluto will be moving into Aquarius just days after we begin this program, which is a wonderful election for developing an understanding of a kind of Aquarian technology in astrology. So ancient Hellenistic astrology, this course is a combination of ancient Hellenistic astrology with a counseling and client-centered approach. We tap into elements of archetypal and psychological astrology as well. But you're going to also learn those ancient Hellenistic techniques that are so good for prediction and description, which are vital parts of any astrological practice. So anyway, at the bottom, you'll find our early bird sale is good until October 15th, as is our early bird installment plan. And then if you have a little bit of, if you need help, check out the need-based tuition option, because that is there for people who are on a fixed or limited income and would really like to study and learn astrology at a deeper level, whether it's for yourself or you want to practice for others. This program meets you where you're at in that respect. But if you need some help to make it happen, apply now for that. We give you the ability to find your tuition point within a sliding scale. And for many people, that makes the course more feasible. So check that out. We hope that it'll help people be able to study with us under a really nice election for studying astrology that's coming up with this new program in November. So be sure again to check those rates out before October 15th. Then we start November 16th. All right, let's go on now to talk about these final days of Pluto and Capricorn. We've done some horoscopes this week for Pluto and Capricorn, and today we're going to reflect on a sort of deeper philosophical level about the meaning of Pluto and Capricorn. So we can see Pluto having turned direct here in the sign of Capricorn. And let's just roll this forward. Pluto's going to start picking up speed after turning direct. And at that 29th anaretic degree, it has some culminating medicine for us between now and about November 19th. On November 19th, we will see that Pluto will move into Aquarius by late afternoon. That's Central Time. I'm in Minneapolis, so that's Central Time on the 19th, late afternoon, that we see Pluto enter Aquarius, where it will then stay for quite a long time. In fact, if we draw this out, let's just drag Pluto all the way through Aquarius, and you'll see that it's not going to fully enter Pisces until about 2045. Right? So that is almost 20 years of Pluto being in Aquarius now. After leaving Capricorn, it is just such a different experience. They were both signs that were ruled by Saturn, and yet the Aquarian Saturn is very different from the Capricornian Saturn. We're going to talk about that today because I think that one of the things we forget, and part of this is due to the way we think about Saturn, we forget that Capricorn is a feminine earth sign and is a sign that is so closely related to an animistic and what I would broadly call pagan experience of the world. Pagan I mean that in an honorary sense. I'm not someone who thinks of the word pagan as a bad thing, not like, at least not the way that Christians I heard in church growing up talked about pagan, right? For me, pagan taps into something that is I could almost describe it as indigenous and global and archaic or primal. And it has to do with the way that divinity is experienced from the ground of physical being, from the matrix of biological experience, and not from a place that is abstracted from that biological reality. Capricorn is such a sacred, beautiful, earthy sign that has so many spiritual values and lessons and offerings for us if we can understand that it is more than just a sign of, keywords we throw around like limitations and strictness and duty and patriarchy and blah, 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 blah. Yes, there are some associations with Saturn and things like strictness or authoritarianism or whatever. And there are dark sides to Capricorn. And we visited some of those in a couple of talks we did maybe several weeks ago now, where I looked at the things Capricorn wants to impart to us before Pluto leaves, or Pluto and Capricorn wants to impart to us before it leaves, and maybe the things we're ready to leave behind. And we explored the light and dark side of Capricorn. But one thing that can be very valuable outside of extracting psychological lessons or attitudes and so forth on an archetypal level can be to meditate on a figure or a god that was associated with the sign. Because when you meditate on a sign in relation to a god or goddess, and there are so many that we can draw relationships to in the zodiac, not even just the Roman or Greek gods, right? But so many from different traditions and cultures around the world that will have an archetypal resemblance to the various signs of the zodiac. But when we do that, it gives to us at a deeper level because we're considering a figure, a person. And just like you or I have experiences of each other or intimate friends or lovers, a person is multidimensional. You can't, if someone says, do you feel like you know your lover? There's two answers to that. Yes, I know them very intimately. And because you understand how deep and ongoing and unfolding intimacy is, you also will say something like, I feel like I'm still getting to know them. So in some ways, penetrating into the deeper offerings of a sign happen more so when we meditate on gods and goddesses than when we just try to abstract themes or things that are applicable for our human experience. It's like, sometimes it just helps to think and meditate and learn about Aphrodite, or in this case with Capricorn, Pan, which is one of the gods that was often associated with Capricorn. So that's what we're going to do today. And then after I read you a few really nice passages from this text by James Hillman, archetypal psychologist, who was a student of Carl Jung's, called Pan and the Nightmare, then I'm going to tell you 5 features of Pan that we can take away, or that I've sort of taken away from this text in my life, and that I frequently associate with Capricorn because of the way that I think about Pan and the way that I have this ongoing reflective relationship with this god. That's the beauty about gods and goddesses, is that when you think about the zodiac, not in terms of abstracting from the zodiac what I am a Capricorn, I am a this, I am a that, my 12th house is a this or a that, blah, blah, blah. But instead, you look at the mandala of the horoscope of your birth chart, and you think about it as an ecology, an animate, divine ecology of gods and goddesses, and that their positions and their conversations is reflecting something that can speak to you in a relationship, that it's not a blueprint of who you are, but that it's this mantic or oracular ecology that's filled with living animate presences that you can relate to and that you can go and speak to. When you think of your chart like that, it changes everything. And one of the figures in mythology that is actually most fundamentally associated with this kind of living animate cosmos is Pan. We'll find out as we go that Pan is actually the one who teaches Apollo the skill of divination. So anyway, let's read, because I'm starting to get so excited. I'm getting into a panic. All right. These are just a few various passages, and after I go through them, I'll offer some reflections as we go. But I want to make it clear that we're using all of these reflections about Pan as a bridge to understanding Pluto and Capricorn, and I'll try to draw that together by the end today. Okay. So again, this comes from James Hillman's Pan and the Nightmare. You can find it on Amazon as far as I know. Above all, we must remember that the Pan experience is beyond the control of the willing subject and his ego psychology. Even when the will is most disciplined and the ego most purposeful, I am thinking now of men in battle. Pan appears, determining through panic the outcome of the fray. Twice in antiquity, at Marathon and against the Celts in 277 BCE, Pan appeared and the Greeks had their victory. He was commemorated with Nike. The panic flight is a protective reaction, even if in its blindness the outcome can be mass death. The protective aspect of nature that appears in Pan shows not only in his affinity for herdsmen, nor in the word root Pan of pastor, pastoral, and pabulum, nourishment, but as well in his role in the Dionysus train, where Pan carries the shield of Dionysus on the march to India. In the Eros and Psyche tale told by Apuleius, Pan protects Psyche from suicide. The soul disconsolate, its love gone, divine help denied, panics. Psyche throws herself away into the river, which refuses her. In that same moment of panic, Pan appears with his reflective other side, Echo, and brings home to the soul some natural truths. Pan is both destroyer and preserver, and the two aspects appear to the psyche in close approximation. When we panic, we can never know whether it may not be the first movement of nature that will yield, if we can hear the echo of reflection, a new insight into nature. As Erbig says in his monograph, this god is always a goat, the goat always a divine force. Pan is not represented by a goat, nor is the goat wholly to Pan. Rather, Pan is the goat god. And this configuration of animal nature distinguishes nature by personifying it as something hairy, phallic, roaming, and goatish. This Pan nature is no longer an idyllic display for the eye, something to walk through or long back to for sweetness. Nature as Pan is hot and close. His hairy animal smell, his erection, as if nature's arbitrary wayward force and uncanny mystery were summed into this one figure. There is a really interesting summary of Pan that I found online, and I thought it was really interesting. This is just a brief summary. Pan symbolizes the untamed aspects of nature and the primal instincts within humanity. His character embodies the balance between civilization and the wild, representing both the beauty and chaos of the natural world. Overall, Pan is a complex figure whose stories highlight themes of love, transformation, and the connection between humanity and primal nature. One of the reasons that we typically want to ban Pan and that we want to push Pan out, and hence we tend to degrade the sign of Capricorn because there's a strong affiliation with the goat god Pan and the sign of Capricorn, is that Capricorn is about the way in which a civilized world cannot ever keep out those wild, untamed, and primordial instinctual elements of nature. They are part of us. Pluto will bring up the darkest elements in at certain times while in Capricorn that remind us that this instinctual piece cannot be banned from the city. You can build walls around the city to keep nature out, but nature will always find its way back in because it is the ground from which we live and breathe and have our existence. We are biological, instinctual beings. Let me give you an example. And this is a really dark example, so it might be a little triggering, but one of the things that I noticed as Pluto was in Capricorn, especially in the early days of Pluto in Capricorn, as it was working its way through the first and second decan, there was a growing number of gun-related acts of violence in public schools. Now, that's been growing exponentially over the years and so forth. So I'm not saying Pluto in Capricorn causes this to happen. But when I reflect on the symbolism of Pluto and Capricorn in relation, what I think about are the way in which those images affect our psyches. That the walls of a civilized place where something refined and Jupiterian like education is taking place and where there is a semblance of order and goodness and virtue, ideally, that is at work, is going to be interrupted by the primordial instincts and impulses of often of things and people that we have either consciously or unconsciously tried to keep out. This often comes up in the image or picture of someone who committed acts of violence, who has severe mental health problems, or who has been left behind in some way. I'm not making excuses for anything. I'm just saying Capricorn will always bring us back to needing to have some kind of awareness of that which is primordial, wild, instinctual, chaotic, and natural. And natural is a word that Capricorn always wants us to think about at a deeper level because our images of natural are like natural soap, natural food, and we think of natural as pure. But natural from Capricorn's point of view includes the things festering in swamps and the bacteria that grows in, puddles and damp places. And I'm not trying to be overly dark. It's just that to the extent that we repress or try to keep out this level of reality, the worse it becomes. And just turn off something that's beeping here. And so this in Hillman's book, Pan and the Nightmare, what he's trying to do over and over again is draw us back to the need that we all have to stay in touch with this rather than demonizing it, which is why the goat and Capricorn is often related to the devil and also the entire history and meaning of the word scapegoat. That we would like to, it's easy to project that part of our own nature onto a bad guy or a bad force or the devil or something evil, something that's lurking, something that's malicious. Capricorn is always inviting us to consider that it is neither good or bad, it just simply is. that nature is not natural soap and natural food and beautiful pictures of wholesome organic purity, but that nature also includes forces of destruction and chaos. And there is an amazing and purifying force that comes with panic. So are when you are in nature and there's always like a video of someone who's like on a hike and then all of a sudden like a cougar starts following them. And we all are just like, it's like a gravitational pull. We have to watch this video we see. How does the hiker get away from the cougar? And you know they live because probably wouldn't see someone getting mauled on Instagram. So, so, but you watch this and afterwards, the panic, that the instinctual fear and adrenaline and anxiety and panic with this, the encounter with a wild animal on a path that you thought was civilized, right? Capricorn is always playing that role in our lives of trying to bring us back to the most basic and primitive realities, which we could describe as hard or harsh or cruel or or in some ways like dark. But it's actually the more that we live with an awareness of those forces as real, and we don't try to whitewash them and live in a little ivory tower of nature being pure and good only, that we stand to exist in a tentative but holy relationship with those realities. It's not that we have to invite them in and become a cougar that destroys a person, or something like that. But it's that if we don't live with some kind of felt connection to those forces and presences, then we're not in the real world. We're not in the world as it is, as is its nature. All right, let's read another passage. These are so interesting. To grasp Pan as nature, we must first be grasped by nature. This is why we do the Grabbed series. When you are grabbed by gods and goddesses in your actual life, in the everyday living of a material life that can't be abstracted through ideas and intellect, that is as raw and libidinal and physical, and it responds with sweat, or your skin goes pale, or your hairs stand up on end. When you're living that life out there, and we use astrology to understand that what we are living with and through are animate forces, then it's by means of being able to see and perceive these are forces, these are persons, these are gods and goddesses, these are elements. When you are able to use astrology in that way, then you're able to understand that this thing that grabs you in your experience is sacred. And somehow you understand that even though it feels kind of violating to be grabbed by planets and gods and goddesses in the walking of our lives, we all know what that's like. If you've experienced an astrological transit and you go, God, I was grabbed, and then we write in and we share our story. But being grabbed like that is a physical experience. It's a human experience. It's a biological and instinctual experience, and it is sacred and divine. Astrology in that way is Capricornian. It's Capricornian in the sense that it's trying to get us into the smelly odor of the gods and their smelly armpits that are wrapped around us as they're, putting us in a headlock. So that's Pan. That's Capricorn. One of the most beautiful mystical things about Capricorn is it says, make your spirituality pagan and animate, make it instinctual, make it a little stinky, make it physical, make it real. Don't try to bypass this material world that is littered with animate magical forces. They aren't somewhere else. You don't get to something beyond this world by meditating or praying your way out of it here. You get to the sacred thing by connecting the sweat and the smell to the world. to the gods and goddesses. To grasp Pan as nature, we must first be grasped by nature, both out there in an empty countryside which speaks in sounds, not words, and in here in a startled reaction. Uncanny as the goat's eye, nature comes at us in the instinctual experience that Pan personifies. But to speak of personification does the god injustice, since it implies that man makes the gods, and that nature is an impersonal abstract field of forces, such as thought conceives it. Boo! Where, whereas the demonic shape of Pan turns the concept nature into an immediate psychic shock. Western philosophical tradition from its beginnings in the pre-Socratics and in the Old Testament has been prejudiced against images, phantasia, in favor of thought abstractions. In the period since Descartes and the Enlightenment, conceptualization has held preeminence. The psyche's tendency to personify has been disdainfully put down as anthropomorphism. One of the main arguments against the mythical mode of thinking has been that it works in images which are subjective, personal, and sensuous. This, above all, must be avoided in Western epistemology, and so in descriptions of the forces of nature. To personify has meant to think animistically, primitively, pre-logically. The senses deceive. Images that would relay truth about the world must be purified of their anthropomorphic elements. The only persons in the universe are human persons. Yet the experience of the gods, of heroes, nymphs, demons, angels, powers, sacred animals, places, things, as persons, indeed, precedes the concept of personification. It is not that we personify, but that epiphanies come as persons. Could we step back from our times, step out of the pretensions of the fearing ego who would bring every atom of nature under its control? Then we might realize again that we are not the source of personified gods. We do not make them up any more than we invent the sounds we hear in the woods, the hoof prints in the sand, the nightmare pressure weighing on our chests. For millennia and most everywhere, it was palpably evident that divine and demonic figures appeared as persons. So what I love about this passage and what he's saying about Pan is that Pan is that force that bridges the gap between what we consider to be spiritual or sacred and our immediate biological experience. And what I love that he's saying is that this is why we really need to spend more time thinking about Capricorn as a feminine sign, a feminine earth sign that is of the nature of Saturn. Remember that Saturn sat as the dimmest, most distant planet at the edge of the visible cosmos, separating as a gatekeeper the realm of the gods and the realm of the numinous that lay beyond. Saturn in Capricorn is about the boundary between the earthly and the numinous. And as a gatekeeper sitting on the threshold, it speaks to our tendency to polarize the two things, as well as the ongoing process of bringing them back together in synthesis, which is the underlying purpose of all oppositions, which Saturn is the aspectual, is the ruler of in aspect theory. So the way we tend to separate spiritual from earthly things is then projected onto Capricorn, and Capricorn becomes a scapegoat for all of the things we don't like about human nature that are here inside the city walls, no matter how much we try to wall them off. It's amazing how puritanical and rigid and unimaginative our ideas about what constitutes natural are. They exist within the city walls. There's no actual contact with nature going on in all of those images of what looks natural, most of which is like skincare products or, I'm being a little cynical, but Capricorn is always about bringing us back into that instinctual awareness. That river has a spirit. You don't know what its intentions are. Like, I'm not saying but you can't assume. You have to be walking as a citizen of Earth, knowing that you are in a complex biomatrix of living presences, energies, elements, gods, goddesses. And in that world, you as a soul you're never apart from the spirit of the room you are in, or the house that you live in, or the land that you live on. And that you will have interactions with animate forces all of the time. And that when you start to experience the world in this way, you live in a kind of sacred realism and a kind of sacred tension or fear with natural forces. And natural is now a lot broader of a word. The nightmare is natural, just as much as a blissful dream is natural. Panic and the hairs standing up on your back because there's a predator nearby is natural. Potentially becoming a predator to something else is natural. And I'm reminded of this whenever I hunt flies in my kitchen. It's not separate. So, the nightmare, he goes on to say, he's talking about nightmares in another passage, indeed gives the clue to the reapproximation to lost, dead nature. In the nightmare, repressed nature returns so close, so real that we cannot but react to it naturally. That is, we become wholly physical, possessed by Pan, screaming out, asking for light, comfort, contact. The immediate reaction is demonic emotion. We are returned to instinct. We are returned by instinct to instinct. So that hiker that's walking down the trail and the cougar comes out. I actually had a friend who had something like that happen to him once, and he was a biker, and this happened. Bicycle, I mean. And so one of the things that I'll never forget him saying, I was visiting him in Northern California, and this was the story he told, if I'm remembering this correctly. Anyway, he said, yeah, like the panic and the adrenaline and the fight or flight and the survival, I came away from it feeling like I was in touch with what it must have been like to be a primitive person living 30,000 years ago. And that was something that he described as deeply valuable, even though it was terrifying. And in a very basic way, nightmares do this to us. They return us to a more imminent reality of animate forces that we can easily abstract from, especially in a day and age where abstraction has become so dominant, dissociation and alienation has become so dominant, and we are, in a sense, looking at the universe as mechanistic rather than animate and living and relational. There was a great book that I read some years ago called The Master and His Emissary, and I cannot remember the name of the author. It was so good. It was about the two hemispheres of the brain. And one of the things that I loved about this book was it basically said the exact same thing. Primarily, reality is conscious, alive, relational, and interactive, communicative, living, sentient. Secondarily, those processes can be reflectively described through mechanisms of cause and effect. But primarily, so we have to learn how to let that part of the brain that is primarily subjective, instinctual, conscious, alive, relational, and more subjective, but not irrationally subjective. It's not like it's just devoid of any kind of order. We have to let that part of us lead first, because it's only through that ground of being that abstraction and the description of mechanics has any real relevance or meaning. And because we've put everything in the opposite order, and the opposite hemisphere of the brain is sort of taking over, there's all of these problems. And then one of the ways in which that part of us comes back, that more personal, subjective, wild, instinctual, relational, living thing comes back, is through the nightmare. It comes back through these primal forces that come up and disrupt our little veneer of natural and civilized and contained and abstract and rational, and it has to, if we are to get back into the actual ground of our being. Capricorn is doing this for us. So isn't it ironic that we demonize Capricorn? We demonize the feminine. I think it's super ironic that people think about this sign as patriarchal. That is so far from the truth of what Capricorn is about. At the same time, you can recognize some of the shadows of the sign of Capricorn. I'm not saying there are none, that it's all just rosy. I mean, Pan is not exactly an easy god to know or have an encounter with, because often the experience is panic. Those encounters with nature, a cougar on the path, awaken and enliven the instinctual body and help us to remember that ground of being, which, if you're staying in the cozy protection of a Cancerian world, the opposite sign, right? And you're always protected and everything's sweet and there's never any encounter with those destructive or chaotic forces of nature. And these are both feminine signs, Cancer and Capricorn, by the way. So the different faces of yin. But if you're never in touch with those things, then when they appear, it's so easy to just call them evil. Right. All right, here's another one. I like this one a lot. It might be well at this point to interpose something on the nature of fear. That it is a so-called primary affect has been stated by psychologists since St. Thomas and Descartes, and is still confirmed by physiologists and by biologists specializing in animal behavior. Cannon has it as one of the 4 fundamental reactions that he investigated, and Lorenz regarded it as one of the 4 basic drive complexes. The traditional Western approach to fear is negative. In keeping with the attitudes of our heroic ego, fear, like many other affects in their images, is first of all regarded as a moral problem to be overcome with courage, as Emerson might say, or Tillich's courage to be in an age of anxiety. Fear is to be met and managed by the hero on his path to manhood. And an encounter with fear plays a major part in initiation ceremonies. Because our culture's first reflection upon the psyche is habitually moral, the psychological value of fear tends to be prejudiced, if not occluded from our perspectives altogether. So entrenched is the moral approach to psychological events that psychology has had to go to physiology and to the study of animals in order to find a path free of moralisms. Although physiology recognizes the protective function of fear, the emotion of fear is generally regarded to be either an accompaniment of instinctual flight patterns, or these same patterns blocked or retained within the organism. This inhibition of motoric behavior, together with increased and prolonged excitation of the organism, vegetative nervous system, and neurohormonal chemical activation, is called anxiety. Simply, there are 2 faces to panic: lived out in relation to a stimulus and called fear, held in with no known stimulus and called anxiety. Fear has an object, anxiety has none. There can be panicky fear, a stampede, say. There can be panicky anxiety, as in a dream. In either condition, death can result. Psychoanalytic and psychosomatic case reports, as well as dream research and anthropological studies, for instance on voodoo death, provide instances of the fatal consequence of panic. The anxiety dream can be distinguished from the nightmare in the classical sense. The classical nightmare is a dreadful visitation by a demon who forcibly oppresses the dreamer into paralysis, cuts off his breath, and release comes through movement. The anxiety dream is less precise in that there is no demon, no dyspnea, but there is the same inhibition of movement. A literary prototype of the anxiety dream, emphasizing an inhibited peculiarity of movement, occurs in the Iliad. Achilles in pursuit of Hector. As in a dream, a man is not able to follow one who runs from him, nor can the runner escape, nor the other pursue him. So he could not run him down in his speed, nor the other get clear. Some theorists of emotion would use the anxiety dream as evidence for their view that anxiety is inhibited fear, a flight pattern retained within the organism, as if instinct were divided into 2 pieces, action and emotion. During the anxiety dream, action being impeded, emotion intensifies. Anxiety, whether in dreams or not, remains in this rather positivistic and behavioristic perspective a substitute, secondary, inadequate reaction. Could we take arms against the sea of troubles? We would not be sicklied over. Contemporary existential philosophy gives to anxiety, dread, or angst a more intentional and oppressive interpretation. Angst reveals man's fundamental ontological situation, his connection with not being. so that all fear is not just dread of death, but of the nothing on which all being is based. Fear thus becomes the reflection and consciousness of a universal reality. Buddhism goes yet further. Fear is more than a subjective human phenomenon. All the world is in fear, trees, stones, everything. And the Buddha is the redeemer of the world from fear, hence the significance of the mudra, hand gesture of fear not, which is not merely a sign of comfort, but of total redemption of the world from its fear and trembling, its thraldom to angst. Buddha's perfected love, in the words of the Gospels, driveth out fear. To further mix the context, let us say that the world of nature, Pan's world, is in a continual state of subliminal panic, just as it is in a continual state of subliminal sexual excitation. As the world is made by Eros, held together by that cosmogonic force and charged with the libidinal desire that is Pan, an archetypal vision most recently presented by Wilhelm Reich, so its other side, panic, recognized by the Buddha, belongs to the same constellation. Again, we come back to Pan and the two extremes of instinct. Brinkman has already pointed to the bankruptcy of all theories of panic that attempt to deal with it sociologically, psychologically, or historically, and not in its own terms. The right terms, Brinkman says, are mythological. We must follow the path cleared by Nietzsche, whose investigation of kinds of consciousness and behavior through Apollo and Dionysus can be extended to Pan. Then panic will no longer be regarded as a physiological defense mechanism or an inadequate reaction, but will be seen as the right response to the numinous. The headlong flight then becomes a breakthrough out of protected security into the uncanny wilderness of elementary existence. Panic will always exist because it is rooted in human nature as such. So its management, Brinkman says, must also follow a ritual, mythological procedures of gesture and music. One is reminded of the pipes in battle, and that Pan's instrument in many paintings is not a syrinx, but more a trumpet. Roscher's enumeration of animal panic does indeed remove the discussion from the level of the only human and psychological in the narrow sense to more universal hypotheses, such as offered by the existentialists, the Buddhists, and the archetypal psychology exhibited in Pan. If we take the evidence that Roscher cites of Pan's terror to be a form of psychic infection attacking both man and animals, then we would seem to have an archetypal event that transcends the only human psyche, thereby placing the nightmare panic in a profound realm of instinctual experience with man, which man shares at least with animals, with trees, stones, and the cosmos at large. This sharing, if panic in animals is not substantially different from panic in man, and if panic is at the root of the nightmare, then the Jones nightmare hypothesis is not enough. For even the boldest Freudian has not extended the universality of the Oedipus complex and of repressed incest, desire, fear beyond the shepherd to the sheep. Freud's psychological hypothesis stopped with the human world. Roscher, however, points beyond the human to a wider area of panic phenomenon. So what he's getting to here is that this is something, this instinctual response is something that seems to inhere in reality itself, that it is an archetypal feature of the cosmos itself. And he goes on to make that point over the next few pages. I just wanted to read you that part because it's really so profound. At the very end of that chapter, he says this: panic, especially at night when the citadel darkens and the heroic ego sleeps, is a direct participation mystique in nature, a fundamental, even ontological experience of the world as alive and in dread. Objects become subjects. They move with life while one is oneself paralyzed with fear. When existence is experienced through instinctual levels of fear, aggression, hunger, or sexuality, images take on compelling life of their own. The imaginal is never more vivid than when we are connected with it instinctually. The world alive is, of course, animism. That this living world is divine and imaged by different gods with attributes and characteristics is polytheistic pantheism. That fear, dread, horror are natural is wisdom. In Whitehead's term, nature alive means pan, and panic flings open a door into this reality. There are 5 features of Pan that I take from these excerpts. 1, what Pluto in Capricorn has put us in touch with over 16 years, so not all at once, but through a process, is what is instinctual and smelly about us and about the world. But if we are able to embrace that non-deodorized element of ourselves, and reality becomes a bridge back into a numinous and animistic cosmos. It's not easy work with Pluto doing this through Capricorn. That there is something both exciting and sexual and blissful and fearful and anxious about being alive and being instinctual. And no matter how many things we do to try to shelter ourselves from ever having to feel anxiety or trauma or fear or anxiety, just anxiousness socially or physiologically, without those forces, we aren't really alive. And so, right relationship with those forces is so much better than the idea that they are somehow bad or that they should be pushed outside the limits or boundaries or walls of our ego. Because then all they do is go into a repressed state where they come back ever more forcefully, no matter what drugs we take, no matter what we try to do. And I'm not anti any kind of treatments, right? I'm open to all of it, whatever's helpful. But there's some way in which we have to make room for the cougar on the trail. It is as real as the sudden chemistry when you meet someone and end up making out with them passionately. It's just those forces are connected. And there is something inherently blissful and anxious about existence in this animate world. Capricorn wants us to be real about those things. That's what's meant by real, not some version of kind of like a conservative, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, hard work and discipline. Those are such a little small part of what Capricorn is about. A lot of the times, those philosophies or those answers are also ways of trying to overcome rather than live with those forces. Discipline. Yes, if you have enough discipline and control, then you will keep out the instinctual, darker elements of nature and of yourself. Does that work? Capricorn is about that approach not working as much as it is about trying to control and restrain and tame those wild forces, which is a shadow of Capricorn. But it's a natural shadow. It's something we all deal with. Nobody wants to be in a reality, for the most part, where cougars can jump out on you on the trail. We all try to control our lives away from that, which is why we live in houses. Imaginal and prophetic. The instinctual level of things, when we are really living in our bodies in the animate pagan reality of the world, there is something about that is necessary and conducive to the divinatory experience. In other words, it's only someone who has a kind of instinctual awareness of the diversity of animate, pagan, natural, and divine forces living around us and through us all the time. It's only someone who's really in touch with that on a very embodied instinctual level who has the ability to recognize signs and omens in nature as speaking as a part of how the gods speak. Animistic cultures are the progenitors of all divinatory traditions on our planet. And the reason for that is that when you walk through this world aware that there is a material phenomenal level and then there is a spiritual animate level and that they coexist, you're able to see when a bird is just another being flying by and when a bird is appearing as an omen. It is the instinctual level of our lives that allows us to live in, inhabit, and read signs and omens in nature, including the stars. They're not abstract from nature. And it's interesting because there's another passage in the book where he talks about how Pan teaches Apollo the art of divination. That's a fascinating little part. Bodily closeness to death. Capricorn was called the gateway of the gods and was associated with the transcendence of the soul into the realm of the gods upon death. All mystical traditions are built on an understanding of impermanence and mortality. As uncomfortable as it is, and as much as we might want to live in the moment, keeping the instinctual, like there's just this sacred anxiety and reality of our mortality and our death, and this kind of transient space that we're actually living in, keeping that close to us, not so close that we become paranoid, not so close that we become possessed, but close enough so that there's a felt tension. There's no guarantee I'm here tomorrow or an hour from now. And that there's a kind of physical and primal awareness of mortality that lives with us. It is that tension that allows us to also perceive and speak with animate forces, because the ability to sense aliveness in the world and to relate to it is so closely related to our awareness of death and impermanence and decay and destruction. Like you can't, to have a felt connection with animate presence is tied to your understanding that animate things are dying all around you, and that you are an animate but mortal being as well. Capricorn wants us to stay in touch with that. Pluto in Capricorn wants us to stay in touch with that. It holds us accountable. Like, you can't drift too far from that, because this is the very edge upon which beauty and bliss and music and art and divinity live. They live on this sort of razor's edge. We see how that says that polar opposite feel of Cancer, where we feel this nexus of sweetness and safety, and we can relax and sleep at ease in the mother's womb. But both are necessary. Sacred earthiness means that we live with an awareness that the directions have power, that there are ancestral spirits, that your house might have a living presence, that a creek near where you live has a personality, that the stars and omens that you see are the mouthpieces or symbolic omens of gods and goddesses. Capricorn is a sign that keeps us close to that by keeping us in the actual ground of our being. I mean, what the feminine does, in broadly speaking, is says, not just above, but below too, right here. So I hope that these 5 features of Pan have been enlivening. You know, that if they shake your instinctual body a little bit and they awaken it, and we should feel fortunate that the universe is always conspiring to try to keep us aware of and appreciative of the very ground that we're on, the very body that we live in. For as scary as it is, we also live in so much shame of the material world and of our bodies and of physical, sensual, stinky life. The instinctual world is one that a lot of religious traditions, especially in the West, have taught us to feel ashamed of. And then we demonize it. We make it into a scapegoat. This is like, there's a lot here we could talk about, the whole history of the devil, you know, and the imagery and thoughts about the devil or evil or personifications of darkness. And a lot of them are goats, you know. So anyway, I'll leave it there, because I'm sure that this has opened an interesting door for everyone to go through and you know, think about and explore. But if you want, check out the book Pan and the Nightmare. Fantastic read. Really has informed a lot of my thinking about Pluto and Capricorn over the years. And let's think about what's left. There's maybe weeks left of Pluto in Capricorn, trying to excite and awaken that instinctual, animate reality that we live in. So I hope you have a great day today. And after I sign off, there's an informational video about the upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. I think you'll love the program, so check it out. I think it is really good for anyone who likes astrology at some point to learn more about the philosophy and craft, because becoming your own astrologer opens things in a way that, I mean, you'll always have people you rely on, channels, astrologers. I do too. But learning to be your own astrologer and your own reader of the symbols because you have a more advanced or even intermediate understanding of the language and its history and philosophy is just so positive for people who find this to be like a valuable part of your spiritual life. So check out the program. It is meant for people like you, I think, who watch this channel. I think that most people who have come through from the channel to the school end up enjoying it immensely. So yeah, stick around for the informational video and hope to see some of you in class soon. Bye. Hey everyone, I'm glad that you're sticking around to hear more about the Year 1 program that's coming up. The program starts on November 16th of this fall, and I am here today to tell you all that the program includes and why I think you really like it if you're thinking about studying astrology. So a few practical details about the course as well. The class begins November 16th, as I mentioned, but it takes place on Saturdays from 12 to about 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's 11 to 2 Central, and typically classes are about 2 hours long. Sometimes they run over with Q&A and discussion, but you can always plan for about 2 hours and you won't miss any of the actual lecture content for the day. You may have to duck out a little early if Q&A or discussion is extending. Sometimes it does, which is why we say between 2 and 3 hours, but typically it's around 2. All of the classes are recorded, so if you can't attend live, you are more than welcome to watch the recordings at your own pace and on your own time. You have lifetime access to the recordings, and everything is housed on a student website. I want to actually give you a just a little preview of what that student website looks like. So I am going to open up my own version of Thinkific, which is the platform that we use. So here's are some of my courses. These are all the Nightlight courses I teach. You can see on the page. But I'm going to tune into, let's go to Nightlight 28, which is the section that began in June of 2024. So here you're going to see that we have orientation instructions, course information, class links, and calendar. Everything you need to know how to access the course is there. And you'll have a version of this in your own panel that you get set up with when you enroll. And then our lessons are laid out. So lesson 1, we have the video, the audio, the slides, the transcript. We have the Q&A box transcript so you can see what people were saying in the chat box during class. We have flashcards. We have a workbook. We have planet and sign glyph flashcards. We have bonus material, videos that we like from YouTube that we link you to. Say, check this video out, check that video out. They go along with some of the things we talked about in class. So every lesson has material for you to go as far as you want with, but the main thing is the video, audio, slides, transcript, etc. are all listed there so that you can download and watch it on your own time if you can't attend live. Again, the live classes do happen on Saturdays for this cohort, starting November 16th. That is our first day of class. And then going forward, it always meets on Saturdays, and we give you the class schedule to map out. And the breaks that we have, the study sessions that we have, everything's mapped out on the class calendar for you. So those are just a few practical details that, just to kind of start us off with. So I'm going to take you over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And I'm going to share with you some information about the program and sort of walk you through what it includes and what you can expect. So it is an almost year-long program. We typically finish between 10 and 11 months out of the year. It can depend a little bit on some of my teaching and scheduling, because sometimes I teach at conferences and it may delay some of our modules by a week or something like that. But it's typically around 10 to 11 months that the program lasts. So we call it our first year program. At Nightlight, we have a program for absolute beginners. You may want to check that out if you are like brand spanking new. That would be 8 to 10 hours of content that's really meant to set you up for the first year course. We sort of assume that if you're coming into the first year program, you already know a little bit about astrology. For example, you have some familiarity with the signs, planets, and houses. Maybe you know what aspects are, but you want to learn more about what they are. But if you are really at the very total entry level space, then try Astrology for Beginners. And when you take that, you could do that right away and then join the first year course in November, and you'd be perfectly set up for it. But anyhow, in this program, over the course of about a year, we work through 30 lessons that I lead. And those lessons are all 2 to 3 hours each, including lecture, a little break, and a Q&A portion where we open up for people to come on mic and camera and ask questions and have an interactive discussion about the material for the day. The program is broken into modules that cover a variety of topics in ancient Hellenistic astrology. That is the earliest era of horoscopic astrology. And so, if you don't know a lot about the different schools of astrology, Hellenistic astrology is going to be the kind of astrology that you see a lot of astrologers practicing nowadays. It's become more popular in the last 30 years or so. And that is due to the fact that a lot of ancient texts with some of the original techniques of horoscopic astrologers were recently translated into the English language, and it's created this renaissance in terms of the use of ancient approaches to astrology. I have a background in modern psychological, archetypal, and evolutionary astrology, and so of course I bring those things to the table, but the course is primarily focused on the excavation of ancient techniques and the spiritual philosophy that ancient astrologers also espoused. The closest thing that I can tell you to what that looks like is ask this question: do you resonate with the philosophy that you hear me take on my YouTube channel? If so, then you're going to love this course in terms of its philosophical and spiritual approach, because the spiritual approach to astrology that I teach is really at the heart of the program. And that's a big part of my life. I approach astrology from a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't belong to one religion or one particular school of thought, but you will hear me talking about things like the soul, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. You'll hear me talk about the need to be soul-centered in our client approach to counseling in astrology. You'll hear me have an appreciation for psychological dimensions of astrology, but also ancient astrology is really very, very good at developing your predictive capacity. We talk about what kinds of predictions are appropriate, how to make appropriate predictions, how to be the right kind of astrologer for our clients without inducing any fear. So there's a lot of care that goes into the development of this craft. But ancient astrology is really amazing when it comes to honing your predictive abilities. And then what you'll find is in this program, there's also a pretty significant emphasis on the psychological dimensions and client care. Anyhow, we go into the roots of ancient Hellenistic astrology and its techniques in this program, and the 30 classes are broken into modules. We work through the history and philosophy. We work through planets, houses, signs, aspects, essential and accidental dignities. And then we get into approaches to the delineation of natal charts. And then at the end of the program, almost a third of the program is dedicated to live client readings, where you're going to see me meet with a person and apply what we've been studying for an hour-long reading. We take a break, we come back, and then we workshop. How did I do that? Why did I make these choices? How did I handle this or that came up in the reading? And it becomes easily the favorite part for most students of the entire program, because by that point, you've got so much theory that you're really ready to see it put into action. We alternate those live client practice sessions with hands-on practice, where students get to bring chart questions into class that we work on. And that's also something that most people really love. A lot of people will look at the curriculum and say, well, I already know planets, houses, and signs and aspects and dignities. But not if you haven't studied Hellenistic astrology, because the approach that ancient astrologers had to these topics is vastly different from the approach that modern astrologers take. So you will be, in a sense, relearning basic things in a brand new way. And I think a much more enriching, deep, and philosophically clear way. It's really nice to know the why behind things. This program and Hellenistic astrology in general is very good at helping you understand the why behind everything that we do. Also, it's really important to participate when you study astrology in a living lineage. So one of the reasons I don't let people jump ahead to my second or third year programs is because I want you to be entrained to a lineage, a particular way of doing things that comes from an astrologer who has a very living, busy, active practice and who has had teachers themselves. I think that's important for astrological learning. That's the model that my own learning take, and so that's what I really want students to take away from my programs. Anyhow, so all of that aside, the second year program focuses After we build our understanding of the basic delineation techniques of birth charts, in year 2, we move into timing techniques, which is all about when the karma of a birth chart is going to be active and expressing itself throughout the course of a lifetime. That's year 2. Year 3 focuses on the development of counseling skills at a much deeper level. And then we also have a 1-year horary program, which is about the development of a very specific predictive technique that can be a really amazing tool to add to your kit. That is 4 years worth of training programs that we have. However, I want to mention that many people take our classes just for the sake, purely for the sake of their own personal growth. Taking these programs is very much like being taught how to utilize a technology that for yourself will be deeply useful for the rest of your life, and maybe for close friends or family members around you. Many people come through our programs taking that benefit away. We'll study through all 4 years of our programs with no intention of being professional. This is their hobby. This is a spiritual tool that will have it will pay dividends over a long period of time. However, many people without the intention to practice come into our courses and discover that they're actually good at it and may end up reading for other people part-time. And then there are students who are deeply, intensely motivated to practice for other people. And it is not that our programs really make those people successful. Our programs contribute to your development, but it really is that some people have a calling to practice professionally. And these programs are designed to give you all the tools you need to develop that confidence and to develop a really coherent set of tools and to entrain yourself to a lineage, which you can also develop your own unique style out of. So those are some of the kinds of people that take our programs, you might say. So the 30 classes on the year are then broken into modules. And in between modules, we have 2 course directors who are present in all of the classes, and they lead breakout tutoring sessions where you can come in and review or ask questions about the module that we've just completed, which is usually anywhere between 2 and 3 classes each. So those breakout study sessions led by our tutors are outside of the 30 classes and very useful. A lot of people like to attend those because they also offer opportunity for community and just lively conversation. We also have 12 online webinar classes led by guest teachers that we host throughout the year. Those are free, and if you can't make them live, they're all uploaded into your student folder. You also have an interactive group forum discussion staffed with tutors who typically respond to questions that you have about the material within 24 hours. So if you can't attend a tutoring session or you just have a random question on a Tuesday night, you can pop it in there and you'll get an answer. We also have a ton of bonus material, optional quizzes, flashcards, tons of supplemental material that is there to help people go as deeply as they want. We have a reading list that is expansive. And that reading list, we don't expect anyone to accomplish. It's more so a resource that we give you saying, here, if you want to know all the things I've read, if you want to know all the things that I love, if you want to know all the things I recommend, here's a master list of everything for each lesson. You could go, PhD level if you wanted to and read thousands and thousands of pages, or you might find that there's just one extra book that looks really interesting and you want to pick it up. But we pride ourselves on making sure you have a ton of resources. You have lifetime access to all the class recordings. You can email our staff or me throughout the year with questions, and my staff will also defer to me in the case that they don't know the answer to a question. So that is what the program includes. It starts November 16th. If you would like to join, at the bottom between now and October 15th, our early bird payments are available. So that saves you some money off the cost of the course. There is a 12-month installment plan that is cheaper than our normal plan, a one-time payment that's significantly cheaper than our normal one-time payment. So you get these little sales that we do until October 15th. We also have need-based tuition assistance. So if you are someone who would like to take this program, but you are on a fixed or tight budget, we have an application there. Click apply now. Just tell us what you need. We give a range. We say between this dollar amount and this dollar amount, what can you spend? And then we set you up with a plan for that tuition number per month. And that is available for anyone. We ask people to apply early because those spots are limited, but we are really accommodating. We try to make sure that nobody's priced out of a spiritual education. Like, this topic should be very accessible for people because I believe that the divine is speaking through the sky, and like anyone should have access to understanding what it's saying, right? So anyway, That is a bit about the program. I hope that this has been useful for you. If there are any questions you have, you can look over the curriculum content on the page, on the year one page. There's more information there. Check out the FAQ section for more questions. Email us info@nightlightastrology.com. And I hope to see some of you in class soon. I think this is going to be a really powerful program because it's also starting right as Pluto's moving into Aquarius. And within the year, we're going to have a Uranus-Pluto trine with Uranus in Gemini. These Aries signatures and the connection between Uranus and Pluto make for a very powerful year to advance our understanding of astrology. So it's a great election year for studying. And I hope to see some of you in class soon.